The Senate will come to order. The senators will please take their seats. Those persons not entitled to the privilege of the floor will please retire to the gallery. The senators and all in attendance will stand and be led in prayer by the Reverend Gene Pupke, First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond. The senators will remain standing and be led in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States by Senate Page Paris Howell of Chesapeake, Virginia.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Clerk will call the roll. All those present will record their vote aye. Clerk will close the roll.
You have a quorum, Mr. President. Senate Journal for Monday, January 14th, 2019.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The senator from Bath, Senator Deeds, moves that the reading of the journal be waived. All in favor of waiving the reading of the journal will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 34, noes 2, Rule 36-1.
Ayes 34, noes 2, Rule 36-1. The reading of the journal is waived.
I will say, with the new technology, I know exactly who's voting no. Because I don't have to turn around and look at the board. It's right there in red.
Duly noted. Duly noted. The clerk will report any communication from the House of Delegates. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Good afternoon, Mr. President.
Good afternoon, Senator.
I would respectfully move that we waive the reading of any communications from the House of Delegates.
Thank the Senator. Question is, shall the reading of the communication be waived? All in favor of waiving the reading of the communication from the House of Delegates will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 37, noes 3.
Ayes 37, noes 3. The reading of the communication from the House of Delegates is waived. Clerk will report any communication from the governor.
We do not have any, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Senator from Russell, Senator Chafin.
Good afternoon, Mr. President.
Good afternoon, Senator.
I rise for an introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you. Situated in the heart of Southwest Virginia is the town of Lebanon. The town of Lebanon is the county seat of Russell County, the county of my home. 200 years ago, this very day, the town of Lebanon was granted its charter by the General Assembly. The town of Lebanon is located at the foot of the mighty Clinch Mountain Range, and the town sits at the 2,000-foot level above sea level. The town today is represented in the gallery by members of the town council, the entire town council, in fact. So with us today are the council, the mayor, the town manager, and the town attorney, as well as guests and family members. Please join me in welcoming our guests. Mayor Tony Doty. The council members are Scott Gilmer, Doyle Fields, Kevin Ferguson, Hassel Kegley, Deanna Jackson, and Mary Stanley. Town manager, Mark Mitchell, town attorney, Kevin Tiller, and guests Gloria Doty, Chuck Stanley, Janet Mitchell, Derek Mitchell, Heather Powers, and Shane Farmer. Later, Mr. President, after the morning hour, we will take up a resolution commending the town of Lebanon on this momentous day of its 200th birthday. Mr. President, please help me in giving the warm welcome of the Senate to our friends from Russell County and the town of Lebanon on this very happy day.
I thank the Senator. Would our friends from the town of Lebanon please rise in the gallery if you're able? Thank you all so much for being here today. We echo the very eloquent words of Senator Chafin and congratulating you on a really wonderful milestone, 200 years. It's an incredibly beautiful part of the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are grateful that you traveled here to the Capitol today. Also to see your favorite son, Senator Chafin, who was born there and represents it very well. I would ask everyone please to join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our friends from Lebanon in Russell County, Virginia. Senator from Russell, Senator Chafin.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the rules be suspended and that Senate Resolution 88 be taken up for immediate consideration.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the rules be suspended and Senate Resolution 88 be taken up for immediate consideration? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? The clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 38, noes 0.
Ayes 38, no 0. The rules are suspended to take up the resolution for immediate consideration. The clerk will please read the title.
Senate Joint Resolution number 88, commending the town of Lebanon.
Mr. President, I move that the resolution do now pass.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the resolution be agreed to? All in favor of agreeing to the resolution will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The resolution is agreed to. The senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Good morning, Mr. President. Ross, for the purposes of introduction.
Good morning. You have the floor.
We're really pleased to have here today, and I'm going to ask you to welcome the International Association of Firefighters, Virginia Firefighters, and the representatives from Fairfax County. Harold Schaitberger is here with us today, who's the president of the International Association of Firefighters. Andrew Pantalis, who is the 4th District Vice President, and Robert Bragg, who is the president of the Virginia's Professional Firefighters Association. And as I said, we're also joined by Ron Cooley, who is president of the Fairfax County Firefighters, and also Aaron Rice. And I would ask that you would extend to them the warm welcome. Let me just add one other thing. When 9/11 hit, the firefighters from Northern Virginia, they were the first ones on the scene while that building was still smoking and in ruins. And they didn't hesitate to risk their lives to bring everything under control.
I thank the Senator. Would our friends from the International Association of Firefighters please rise to the gallery if you are able? Thank you all so much for joining us here today. We are honored by your presence and grateful for your bravery and your work. The many men and women who serve us as firefighters in the Commonwealth of Virginia and around this nation are the bravest that we have. And so thank you, Harold. Thank you to Robert, to Aaron, to Ron, to Andrew. We are grateful for your service, and we will always support you in the work that you do. So I would ask everyone to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our leaders from the International Association of Firefighters. Senator from Arlington, Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for purposes of an introduction, but I believe that I will have to rise again for purposes of an introduction because I have notes that there's several groups I should be introducing. I don't have their green sheet yet. So if you forgive me, and I guess do one right now.
Without objection, Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my pleasure to introduce Madeline Kellen. She's the granddaughter of Senator Whipple. And Mr. Whipple, and also Dan Brown. And knowing Madeline, I think she's here to advocate for lots of good causes, to observe how the General Assembly operates, and I'm sure to take this knowledge and then incorporate it into her future studies and ambitions. So I ask the Senate to extend a very warm welcome to Madeline Kellen. Thank you so much.
I thank the Senator. Would Madeline Callahan and Dan Brown please rise in the gallery if you are able? Madeline and Dan, thank you all so much for being here today. We are honored by your presence and hope you enjoy a great day in the Senate and in the Capitol. Senator Whipple was a tremendous leader in the Senate for many years, and we're grateful for all that she has continued to do. So I know she's very proud of you as well. You're welcome back here anytime. I would ask everyone to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our two distinguished guests. Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain.
Mr. President, I move that the special and continuing joint order provided for in House Joint Resolution number 606, Rule 6, be held on Wednesday, January 16, 2019.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall the special and continuing joint order provided in HJR 606, Rule 6, be held on Wednesday, January 16th, 2019. All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk, close the roll.
Ayes 39, no 0.
Ayes 39, no 0. The special and continuing joint order provided in HJR 6, Rule 6 will be held on Wednesday, January 16th, 2019. The senior senator from Richmond City, Senator Sturdivant.
Good afternoon, Mr. President.
Good afternoon, Senator.
I rise for an introduction.
You have the floor.
Like one of the other senators who spoke, I may have other introductions, but this is my first introduction for the green sheet that I've received today. And joining us in the Senate gallery, Mr. President, are members of Virginia's PTAs. They're here at the Capitol today, I know, advocating for many different things, not the least of which are for our public schools, for increased funding for education, and for better and higher teacher salaries for our great teachers. And I'd ask that we offer them the warm welcome of the Senate, Mr. President.
I thank the Senator. Would our friends from Virginia PTAs please rise in the gallery if you're able? Daily reminder, you deserve it, but we'll clap together at the end. Thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for your advocacy on behalf of our children and our families and our public schools. It's so critical that we invest in our young people and in our teachers who do such a great job. And it wouldn't be possible without the parents who are so actively engaged in their children's education. So we are grateful to you. You are welcome back here anytime in the Senate. And I would ask everyone please to join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our distinguished guests from Virginia's PTAs. Senator from Northwestern Fairfax, Senator Boysko.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for an introduction.
Thank you, Senator. You have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the body, and Mr. President, today I introduce Kathy Shoup, Shamala Houth, and Barbara Jones, who are here from my neighborhood on behalf of the Virginia Equal Rights Coalition. And I hope it is your pleasure to give them a warm Senate welcome. Thank you.
I thank the Senator. One more reminder, we'll clap together at the end, but we're so happy to see you all here. Kathy, Shamala, Barbara, thank you guys so much for being here today. Thank you for your consistent advocacy in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We are grateful to you. You're a welcome presence here in the Senate and on Capitol Square, and we wish you nothing but the best in this session and in 2019. I would ask everyone to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our three friends and distinguished guests. Senator from Bath, Senator Deeds.
Mr. President, rise for an introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, we're honored to have in the gallery today a group from Charlottesville, from the Charlottesville chapter of NOW. They're led by Charlotte Gibson, and they're here to see a debate that's going to occur in this chamber in just a little bit.
I thank the Senator. Would Charlotte Gibson and our friends from Charlottesville NOW please rise in the gallery if you are able? Thank you all. Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Thank you for traveling from beautiful Charlottesville to be with us in the Capitol in Richmond. We are grateful to you for your citizen advocacy and for all the work that you do. And so I want to welcome you back here anytime to the Senate and enjoy today on Capitol Square. I would ask everyone please to join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to Charlotte and our friends from Charlottesville NOW. The senior senator from Richmond City, Senator Sturdivant.
Mr. President, I rise for another introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, joining us also in the gallery this afternoon are members of the League of Women Voters. They are here to advocate on behalf of the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, along with many of the members of the Virginia PTA, as I saw, and I'd ask that, Mr. President, you offer them the warm welcome of the Senate.
Thank the Senator. Would our friends from the League of Women Voters please rise in the gallery if you are able? Thank you all so much for being here today. We are grateful that you took the time out to join us in the Senate and in the Capitol, and grateful for your advocacy on behalf of such important issues. And we welcome you back here anytime to the Senate. And I would ask everyone to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our friends from the League of Women Voters. Senator from Petersburg, Senator Dance.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for an introduction.
Thank the Senator. You have the floor.
Mr. President, following the theme of all the women's groups that have been introduced thus far and the mission they have as far as why they're here at our Capitol today, we'll follow with the women of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, who have been coming for almost the last year every time there has been some mention of the ERA. And if they're in the gallery, I would ask that you would give them a warm welcome of the Senate.
Thank the Senator. Would our friends from Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated in the gallery please rise if you're able? Thank you all so much for joining us here today. We are grateful for your leadership, and we know you just had a Founders Day recently on January the 13th. Delta is an incredible organization, a great sorority that does work all around the world to make us better off. And so I would ask everyone please to join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our friends from Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Senator from Arlington, Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I rise for purposes of an introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, we are here to welcome Zero Carbon Virginia. And it is a group of scientists, engineers, economists, public health experts, and concerned citizens who really want to seek a path towards a zero carbon energy future. This group is on Capitol Square to advocate for Senate Bill 1648, and this bill aims to reduce and limit our reliance on fossil fuels. The members of the group that are here today, Leslie Emery, Carol Sababadoa, Alice Roby, Sarah Al-Ali, and Nathan Souls, are very dedicated folks who are going all over the state to help ensure that we find a pathway forward. With that, Mr. President, I ask that the Senate give this group a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank the Senator. Would our friends from Zero Carbon Virginia in the gallery please rise if you are able? Thank you all so much for joining us here today. Thank you for your work and your advocacy on such an important and critical issue to our environment and to our communities, and we are grateful for all that you do here in Virginia. You're welcome back here anytime, and I would ask everyone to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our friends from Zero Carbon Virginia. Senator from Eastern Fairfax, Senator Servell.
Mr. President, I rise for introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen of the gallery, joining us in the gallery today is one of my constituents, Lisa Sales. And Lisa is here on behalf of the Fairfax County Commission of Women, which I believe my mother might have helped found back in the early 1970s. But the Fairfax County Commission on Women advises the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors on policies and initiatives to promote greater gender equality, eliminate violence against women, and honor women in Fairfax County. They've been advocates for stronger standards on protective orders. And, of course, they're here like a lot of other people today, not wearing their purple, but here to support the equal, oh, there it is on the button, here to support the Equal Rights Amendment as well, and hope you give them the warm welcome of the Senate.
I thank the Senator. Would Lisa Sales and our friends from the Fairfax County Commission on Women please rise and gallop if you're able? Thank you all so much for joining us here. We are grateful that you took the time to travel from Fairfax, our home, and the Senator from Eastern Fairfax appropriately recognized your great work on so many issues important to women, but really important to all of us in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So keep up the great work. You're welcome back here anytime. And I would ask everybody to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our friends from the Fairfax County Commission on Women. Senator from Northwest Fairfax, Senator Boysko.
Mr. President, I rise for another introduction.
Senator has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen of the body, Mr. President, I would like to introduce my constituent today, Pastor Michelle Thomas, founder of the African American Historic Preservation Group, the Loudon Freedom Center, and the pastor of Holy and Whole Life Changing Ministries. Pastor Michelle is also the newly elected president of the Loudoun County chapter of the NAACP. And I know that she has been here in the past. This is not her first visit. Mr. President, I hope that you will give her and anyone else in the NAACP a warm Senate welcome. Thank you.
Thank the Senator. Would Pastor Michelle Thomas and our friends from the NAACP please rise in the gallery if you are able? Pastor Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for your tremendous leadership in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in Loudoun County. Congratulations on becoming the president of the Loudoun chapter of the NAACP, and we are so looking forward to all that you're going to do to make our Commonwealth even better and fairer. And so we're grateful to you. I know you're a Duke University graduate, so I just want to mention that as well, but you have done such great work for so long, and we look forward to the best is yet to come. Thank you, beautiful family, for us, and I would ask everyone to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to Pastor Michelle Thomas and our friends from the NAACP. Junior Senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask that you give a warm Senate welcome to the Reverend Jean Pupke, who delivered our invocation this morning. She has been the senior minister of First Unitarian Universalist Church of Richmond since 2006, and is a frequent advocate for women's rights, LGBTQI rights, and youth rights. And I think she's pretty excited to be here to give the invocation on today in particular. And I ask that you give her a warm Senate welcome.
I thank the Senator. Will the Reverend Jean Pupke please rise in the gallery? Reverend, thank you so much, first of all, for that really wonderful prayer. You got us off to the right start this morning in the right frame of mind. Thank you for your leadership in the Commonwealth of Virginia and for all you do to expand the scope of opportunity and to make sure that we all have an opportunity to rise together. So we are grateful to you. You, of course, are welcome back here anytime to the Senate. And I would ask everyone to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to the Reverend Jean Pupke. Senator from Northwestern Fairfax, Senator Boysko.
Mr. President, I rise for another introduction, and normally I wouldn't have done this 3 times in a row. I would have put them all together.
No worries. Senator has the floor.
Thank you so much. Members of the body, we have friends from CASA in Action here today with us in the gallery. They are here to advocate for our driver's license and immigrant issues that make us a more welcoming and friendly community for everyone and an economy that works for all. And I ask you, Mr. President, to give them a warm Senate welcome.
Thank the Senator. Would our friends from CASA in Action in the gallery please rise if you're able? Thank you. You will get 2 rounds of applause. We're gonna wait till the end, but thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for your advocacy on such important issues and for fighting for your fellow Virginians. And we're grateful to you for being here in the Senate. You're welcome back here anytime. And I would ask everyone now to please join me in extending the warmest welcome of the Senate to our friends from CASA in Action. Do any other senators wish to be recognized for purposes of an introduction? Seeing none, the Senate will stand at ease. The Senate will come to order. The senators will please take their seats. Resolutions, petitions, and bills are in order. Is there any other business to come before the Senate for the morning hour? Seeing none, the clerk will call the calendar.
Senate calendar for Tuesday, January 15th, 2019. Uncontested calendar, Senate bills on third reading.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I respectfully move that all the Senate bills on the third reading on the uncontested calendar, which would include all Senate bills on pages 2 through 4, including Senate Bill 1215 through Senate Bill 1358, be placed on their final passage in the block. Any senator who may desire to remove one of these Senate bills from the block should please do so after the clerk has read the number of that bill.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall the Senate bills on the uncontested calendar, third reading, pages 2 through 4, Senate Bill 1215 through Senate Bill 1358, be placed upon their final passage in the block, with the understanding that any senator desiring a bill be removed from the block will do so after the clerk has read the number of the bill. All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The bills are before us in the block. Clerk will read the number of the bills.
Senate Bill 1215, Senate Bill 1220, Senate Bill 1249, Senate Bill 1298, Senate Bill 1314, Senate Bill 1358.
Question is, shall the bills in the block pass? All in favor of the passage of the bills will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 40, noes 0.
Ayes 40, noes 0. The bills in the block pass.
Regular calendar, Senate bills on third reading. Senate Bill 208, a bill relating to impact fees for residential development.
Senator from King George, Senator Stewart.
Good morning, Mr. President.
Morning,
I would ask that bill be passed by for one more day.
Without objection, Senate Bill 208 will be passed by for the day.
Senate Bill 944, a bill relating to cash proffers impact fees.
Senator from King George, Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I'd ask that bill go by for the day.
Without objection, Senate Bill 944 will go by for the day.
Uncontested calendar, Senate bills on first reading.
Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would now move that all the Senate bills on the first reading on both the uncontested and regular calendar, which would include all Senate bills on pages 5 through 10, including Senate Bill 1031 through Senate Bill 1426, that the rules of the Senate be suspended and that the first constitutional reading of the titles be dispensed with.
I thank the senator. The question is, shall the rules be suspended and the first reading of the titles of Senate bills on the uncontested and regular calendars, pages 5 through 10, Senate Bill 1031 through Senate Bill 1426, be dispensed with? All in favor of the motion will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 40, noes 0.
Ayes 40, noes 0. The reading of the titles is dispensed with. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, I now respectfully ask that all the bills be passed by for the day, sir.
Thank the senator. The question is, shall the Senate bills on the uncontested and regular calendars now on second reading be passed by for the day? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The bills will go by for the day.
Page 10, regular calendar, Senate Joint Resolution on third reading. Senate Joint Resolution 284, ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment of the Constitution of the United States.
We'll call on the senior senator from Richmond City, Senator Sturdivant, and as the senator rises, and look forward to you taking your time discussing this matter. I know that there are a number of senators who would like to speak on this particular measure. I would also remind our friends in the gallery that in order to proceed, we need to not have any outbursts one way or the other on this particular debate. So we would ask respectfully if everyone would please pay attention to the senators and not have any outbursts on this particular measure. The senior senator from Richmond City, Senator Sturdivant.
Good afternoon again, Mr. President. I rise to speak to the resolution.
Thank the senator. You have the floor.
Mr. President, I think before we begin the discussion of the merits of the resolution, I understand that one of my colleagues may have proposed amendments to it.
Senior senator from Loudoun County, Senator Black.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move reconsideration of the vote by which the Senate joint resolution 284 was ordered engrossed and advanced to its third reading, and ask that it be returned to the second reading for amendment.
Do any other senators wish to be heard?
Mr. President.
Senior senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Since
this language in the Equal Rights Amendment was sent to us by the U.S. Congress, my understanding is states cannot amend a constitutional amendment. Is that correct? And if so, would therefore these proposed amendments be out of order?
Well, I didn't want him bringing it up later in the process.
The senator is correct, and we believe this motion, the chair rules this motion would be out of order.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senior senator from Richmond City, Senator Sturdivant.
And rise to speak to the resolution, Mr. President.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, before you this afternoon, as you know, is the Senate resolution to approve the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment to the United States Constitution. And I know that this is an issue that has sometimes resulted in passionate feelings on both sides of the issue. But I hope that as you sit here today, you might keep your mind open and hear perhaps a different perspective on this amendment than you have heard previously. And as an initial matter, I think it's important to note some historical context for the Equal Rights Amendment. I think oftentimes people think that the Equal Rights Amendment came out of the 1970s, and we've been discussing it ever since then. But in one form or another, the ERA has actually been around for the last 100 years, the last century. It was actually first conceived by Alice Paul and other leaders of the women's suffrage movement in the early 20th century. And in fact, the ERA was first introduced to the United States Congress by the nephew of Susan B. Anthony in the early 1920s. He was a congressman from Kansas at the time. And the language that is before you for consideration today is modeled almost verbatim after the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. And I think it's important to hear the language of both the 19th Amendment and the Equal Rights Amendment together so that you can compare how similar they are. The 19th Amendment, again, which gave women the right to vote, says this, quote, "The rights of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex," end quote. The Equal Rights Amendment, which is just 24 words, is very similar, and it says this, quote, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex," end quote. So that historical pedigree there is important for the body to consider. Both the 19th Amendment and the Equal Rights Amendment come out of the women's suffrage movement of the early 20th century. And as we know, the ERA has continued to be debated and discussed over the last 100 years. The second point that is important to note is that the goal of the Equal Rights Amendment, that is equality between men and women, has been the law of the land for many years. And of course, a lot of progress has been made over the last several decades. Prohibitions on sex discrimination are already in federal and state law and in about half the states' constitutions, including Virginia's Constitution, which has had our own Equal Rights Amendment since the early 1970s. So the question, of course, why do we need this amendment and why now? And the answer is very simple. Equality between men and women is a core fundamental American value. And it's one that we all agree on, no matter where you stand on the Equal Rights Amendment. But despite these protections that already exist, federal and state law and state constitutions can and do change. And as we see every session, every General Assembly, they are changed pretty easily. And perhaps more importantly than that, depending on who you ask, some do not feel that equality between men and women is currently protected in the United States Constitution. In fact, it was Justice Scalia who famously noted in 2010, less than a decade ago, that, in fact, the U.S. Constitution does not prohibit discrimination on the basis of sex. This is what Justice Scalia said 9 years ago. Quote, "Certainly the Constitution does not require discrimination on the basis of sex. The only issue is whether it prohibits it. It doesn't." End quote. That's why it's important that we include the protection of this fundamental American value in the United States Constitution, just like the other American values that are preserved and protected there. Now, there are, of course, those who oppose the ERA, and we'll hear some of those arguments today. But again, as I noted earlier, wherever you stand, we all agree on that fundamental American value in the ERA, that the government should treat men and women equally under the law. There's no question about that. But there are nonetheless two primary arguments against the ERA. The first argument is a procedural one. It's that the ERA is not timely and can no longer be ratified. And I'd offer a few points in response to that. First and foremost, this debate is not happening in a vacuum. Other states have ratified the Equal Rights Amendment in the last several years, and as far as I'm aware, neither the courts nor Congress have said that those states were wrong for ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment when they did. Secondly, very smart and reasonable people disagree over whether Congress has the constitutional authority in the first place to put a time limit on the ratification of an amendment, or whether a deadline for ratification can be extended after ratification. And then lastly, let's say just for a moment, for the sake of argument, that the time for ratification has in fact expired and the Equal Rights Amendment can no longer be ratified, and that this is just a purely symbolic vote. Well, then at the very least, we should do that. The General Assembly is no stranger to symbolic votes. The second argument against the Equal Rights Amendment is more of a substantive one. And that argument against the ERA is that it could be misinterpreted or misapplied for things other than treating men and women equally. But again, some historical perspective is important. That's why I mentioned earlier, women's equality is and has been protected in large part in state and federal law and in state constitutions. And yet, despite having been the law of the land for several decades, the concern raised in the modern opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment have not materialized in any real way. But more importantly than that history over the last 40 or 50 years, I'd ask you to consider it from this perspective as legislators. I'd ask you to put yourselves in the shoes of those same legislators who considered and ratified the Bill of Rights 200 years ago. In their time, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly freedom of the right to keep and bear arms, the freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures, were all novel and extraordinarily expansive rights for their time. And there were, of course, those who opposed those amendments in one way or another because of how those amendments might be interpreted or applied, just as the ERA is today. But they were and are fundamental American values worthy of protection from government interference. And they are now spelled out and protected in the Constitution. The same should apply here. The only difference is that the equal treatment of men and women is not a novel or a new right. So the decision here should be much easier to make. I'd also ask you to consider this, reflecting on your time in the General Assembly. How often have you seen the freedom of speech under assault? How often have you seen efforts to restrict religious freedom? How many times have you seen attempts to infringe the right to keep and bear arms? Whatever your answer is to those questions, remember that those are rights that are explicitly protected in the Constitution itself. How fragile, then, is the equality between men and women, which is not explicitly protected in our founding document? And as you go through that process of putting yourselves in the shoes of those who ratified the Bill of Rights 200 years ago, ask yourself, what if opponents had told you that while those freedoms might be good and just and true, that they could be misinterpreted or misapplied or abused? Ask yourself, would you still vote for them? Whether they be free speech or religious freedom or guns. I know that every single one of you still would. And the same should apply for the Equal Rights Amendment. And respectfully, therein lies the fundamental flaw with the arguments against the Equal Rights Amendment. At their core, the arguments against the ERA recognize that the principle that men and women should be treated equally under the law is good and just and true. But the argument goes, we must reject that fundamental American principle because it could be misinterpreted or misapplied or abused. Put another way, the rejection of a fundamental American value in the Equal Rights Amendment is considered acceptable because doing so would achieve a desired end. I'd respectfully submit to you that that is an ends justifies the means justification. That's an ethic that says that as long as the ends are good, the means to achieve them are also good. But that is not the ethic that any of us seek to live by. It is not the ethic that we raise our children to practice. And it is not the way in which we should judge the Equal Rights Amendment. And in closing, that's why we don't do this in any other context. We all agree that the equal treatment of men and women under the law is a fundamental American value. I ask you to consider, what other fundamental American value do we reject because of our concern over how some may interpret it? I can't think of one. The bottom line is that when we stick to our core American principles, which includes treating people equally, regardless of their immutable characteristics, we get it right every single time. And therefore, I'd ask you to support the passage of this resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. Senator from Petersburg, Senator Dance.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak to the resolution.
Thank the senator. You have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, I have had the honor of serving as number 2 on this resolution as it's moved. Number 3 would be Senator DeSarvo, Senator Staff. There are so many senators I'm going to mess up. But I will tell you that I know that all of us that signed on because we believed that it was time for us to just do what's right and move this off the table as far as those issues that we have to address here in the General Assembly. I watched this bill come up each year, and last year I sat in rules when it came up, and I felt kind of helpless as I watched the large delegation of mostly Euro-American women who came to speak in support of the then resolution, all about ratifying Equal Rights Amendment. And last year, because we were into 2019, but it was 2018, when they asked if I would sign up. And I thought about that and realized the importance of standing up and how much this meant to me personally, because I shared with the group the fact that my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, was a part of that suffrage march that took place in 1913. They were brave African American women who were only allowed to walk at the back of the march, dangerous spot to be in. But they felt that at that time that it was important to march. So even then, over 100 years ago, even though they didn't get the right to vote, my sisters at that time, they knew that this was the right thing to do, and it has become a very important part of women's history. They marched then, and when I gave them a rally call to say, it is time for us to do this together, and it was joy to my heart to see how many of them quickly made their way from across the Commonwealth of Virginia to stand with their sisters, who might not look like them, but what they shared is that now is the time when all women should come together with one voice. Over 100 years ago, we had to rely on a few good men to give women the rights to vote. Today, 400 years after this, the first gathering of legislators in this Commonwealth, 400 years after my sisters and brothers, African Americans, came to this soil, we have come to a place where the people that have come, the women and men, they represent all of us in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They are Democrats, Republicans, Independents. We agree and disagree on some things, but on this, there are huge numbers of us that agree that it is the right thing to do. I am proud, and we've announced the various groups of women and men that are here today, and I assure you, they've come with one voice in support of this. When this resolution was presented in committee, Privileges and Elections, I said that our chief patron, the senior senator from Richmond City, was a lawyer-in-chief as it related to this bill, because he so eloquently laid out the law and gave the rationale for it, and I would not attempt to try to do this. We also had the senator from, is it East Fairfax, do I have it right? He is the senator that lived it. So we have the historian and we have the interpreter of what happened those many years ago. And altogether, I think we know we're at this point that we can be the 38th state that ratifies the Equal Rights Amendment. And what has been said by the lawyer-in-chief If you question whether or not this will take place or whether we've missed a deadline, he used a term that we can think about that should join us. Be symbolic of what you know is right, that all of us in the Commonwealth of Virginia are equal. And we should reflect that in the documents that tell our story for now and the future to come. I pray that when we finish at the end of the day, we will leave these chambers knowing that we are better, and we have voted for the Equal Rights Amendment resolution that is on the floor. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. The senior senator from Loudoun County, Senator Black.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking to the measure.
Senator has the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have deepest respect for the patron of the bill and for everyone in here who supports it for very genuine reasons. All of us want equal rights. I will tell you that back in segregated Miami growing up, I felt that it was terribly unfair that there were some people who had to sit in certain parts of the bus. And I, as a very, very shy and very pimple-faced young fellow, one day walked onto the floor of the bus, and I looked up, and there were letters that wrote "colored only" to the back. And I walked to the back with my heart pounding, and there were a group of black workmen, and I said, "Sir," I said, "may I have a seat?" And with some reluctance, they made a spot, and from that day on, I rode in the back of the bus, not to create a disruption, but simply to make a point that people should be treated equally, regardless of their race. When I was a state or a senator, student senator at the University of Florida, there was an extremely important resolution. We have an organization in Florida called the Florida Blue Key, which really is the prerequisite to advancing into political office, becoming governor, becoming lieutenant governor, whatever. And it was deadlocked. There were very few Republicans in the student senate. And out of exasperation, the individuals who were introducing this bill that would have admitted women to the Florida Blue Key came to me. And I said, I will support that. And I supported it, and I broke the deadlock in favor of the women. And women since that day have been able to join the Blue Key and have that fundamental building block that gave them the opportunity to serve in higher office in the state of Florida. So I have enormous respect for all Americans, that they all be treated equally. However, if you look at this bill, now we have legislation in the state of Virginia, which grants women equal rights under the law, and it's effective. But there's a reason that 40 years ago, the federal Equal Rights Amendment was rushing without any opposition to enactment. And suddenly, it came to a screeching halt when people began to analyze the unintended consequences based on the particular language that was used. Now, it wasn't a problem when we were talking about voting rights, because voting rights are relatively simple and self-contained. But the words of the ERA read, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." It's interesting that the ERA nowhere mentions women. The ERA's impacts are potentially very harsh and revolutionary. Here are a couple of things that happen with the ERA if we apply those words or abridged, which essentially mean that they must be taken literally. On abortion, our law banning partial birth abortions will be swept away. The law restricting late-term abortions will likely be stripped away. The law that I patroned back in 2003, which requires that no surgical abortion can be carried out on a young girl without her parents' consent, is likely to go away. And other abortion laws, essentially, it will sweep the field of the abortion laws that vast numbers of Americans have fought for and struggled for over 75 or since 1973. One of the interesting things is the military draft. There's always been some discussion about what would happen with the military draft because women have been given additional roles within the military. But because of the language of the ERA, which does not refer to women, it refers simply to sex, that essentially there will not be a distinction made on account of sex. A wartime draft must treat women just like men. In the Second World War, 10 million men were drafted into the armed forces of the United States. Under the ERA, roughly half of them would be men and half of them would be women. Now, someone might say, well, but wait a minute, women have lower upper body strength, and that would screen out a great number of them. But keep in mind that lower upper body strength is a sexual distinction, and this says that we will not deny or abridge any rights based on account of sex. Now, you might not have a lawsuit by a woman. You might very well have a lawsuit by a man who says, wait a minute, I'm being drafted. I shouldn't be drafted. Why not draft women instead, or at least in addition, and draft them equally, which would drive down my draft number and I wouldn't have to go. So this is something that I think is likely to happen. Now, not only that, but, you know, there's been experimentation back and forth about women in combat units. Now, it's clear that most women do not desire to be. There are a handful who would like to be in military, in frontline units, but very few. And under the ERA, it is clearly arguable, and I think quite likely, that when we talk about frontline combat, we're probably talking about roughly equal numbers of men and women. Because again, if you say, well, now wait a minute, a woman can't carry as much, she can't carry as heavy a load of ammunition, weapons, so forth. Wait a minute, this is a sexual distinction, and you cannot take sex into account. So we're going to have, I think, a very, very severe and radical alteration in the military draft and in service within combat. I think under this, because we cannot distinguish among sexes, the units could not separate men and women Separate toilets, showers, or sleeping arrangements would be forbidden. And as a consequence, I will tell you, we may have a very highly trained and highly disciplined military force today. I have lived through a situation where I have watched the military go from a superb state of discipline to one where it was somewhat resembling a mob towards the latter days of Vietnam and post-Vietnam. And we put at risk, at grave risk, women who are in service in those situations of chaos and violence and difficulty. You don't just fight in the daytime. You fight in the night, and you don't just fight out in the open. You fight deep in the jungle, where sometimes you only have one person that you're in contact with at a time. I've been there. I know that. And if the person that you're fighting with has some inclinations that are not what we would like, it places women at very grave risk. One of the things that has not been discussed with all of this is its impact on churches. Now remember, we cannot deny rights to anyone under this constitutional amendment on account of sex, and their rights will not be denied or abridged. Well, what about our churches? The Catholic Church distinguishes based upon sex who will be involved in the priesthood. The Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints has very, very strict distinctions between the roles of men and women within the church. I have attended Muslim mosques a number of times, and I will tell you that women are totally and completely separated from men within the Muslim mosques. I understand that in Orthodox Jewish temples, somewhat similar situations are found. The list goes on and on. The Southern Baptists make significant distinctions between the roles of men and women in their churches. And beyond that, beyond what happens within the churches, donors would be unable to deduct gifts from their tax returns to organizations such as Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities, probably one of the biggest charitable organizations in the country, but there are distinctions based on sex in various areas driven by the faith of the Catholic Church. Let's look at privacy, remembering that there will be the equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged on account of sex. So in privacy, no public college or K through 12 public school could separate boys and girls or men and women in dormitories, toilet, shower facilities. And I believe that this would make school attendance threatening and quite dangerous for girls and women. I thought about prisons because I've done a lot of work in prisons. I've been present in probably a dozen of them. And I was fortunate. I received or got a pardon for Alan Crawford, and I went to Goochland Women's Prison. So I've been there a number of times, including when she was pardoned by Governor Tim Kaine. Our prisons are separate by race, or rather by sex. We have male and female prisons, but under this, you could not distinguish between men and women in the prisons. In most instances, and there are exceptions, but in most instances, our prisons have two-man cells, two-person cells, whatever you want to call them. Under this rule, under this amendment, if applied literally, without abridgment, then male and female prisoners could not be assigned to cells based on their sex. I don't imagine that women prisoners could be subjected to more horrific conditions than these, to be placed in cells with men year after year, sometimes for many years, and that would be a problem. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, the ERA has languished since Congress passed it in 1972. It was flying through because just like all of us here, just like the patron, just like all of us, we do believe in equal rights. I don't believe there is a person on either side of the aisle who does not believe in equal rights. But while it was flying forward to passage, suddenly it came to a screeching halt once its rather drastic and very dangerous and very harmful implications became apparent. Not only did it come to a screeching halt, I mean just overnight it came to a screeching halt, but 5 states quickly rescinded their ratifications, and the other states simply shunned it for 40 years. The fact that it demands strict interpretation really places the ERA in a rather unique situation, and it rescinds every rule making reasonable distinctions that presently protect women from sexual assault in these various situations. And it mandates harsh financial penalties on religious institutions, potentially bankrupting some of our major religious cultural institutions. So the question is, would the U.S. Supreme Court fix its failures judicially? I don't believe that we can count on the U.S. Supreme Court to rectify things, and frankly, there is a move towards more literal interpretation of rules coming before the Supreme Court, and this would be an unfortunate situation if they did read this literally, as I believe they are required to do. Ladies and gentlemen, with greatest sympathy, I got to tell you, I have stood up for women when they were desperately anxious to break in to the political arena in Florida. This was back in the early 70s. And I stood up and I cast the tie-breaking vote, and I spoke in favor of women entering politics through the elite Florida Blue Key. But today I stand up and I ask that you oppose this measure because it does not do what we intend it to do, and its unintended consequences are very dramatic and very harmful. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the Senator. Senator from Chesterfield, Senator Chase.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in opposition to the measure.
Thank you, Senator. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I find it ironic that the Senator from Loudoun's amendments were ruled out of order, yet we here in the state Senate are taking up an expired, dead amendment from 40 years ago. Those who want to pass the ERA amendment really should talk to their congressman or congresswoman. That said, Mr. President, I rise to speak in favor of equal rights, yet in opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. bringing the concerns from thousands of Virginian women to the Senate floor today. As a woman myself, obviously, I support equal rights for women. And I might add, I appreciate those of you who've gone before me and paved the way. Many are convinced that if Virginia passes this equal rights amendment, women will no longer be victimized. Yet the bill itself actually victimizes the very women it claims to protect. It assumes that women will blindly trust and will not read the fine print. Well, I've read the fine print, and I'm offended, and I'm not buying it. In reading the article itself, the word woman or female is not even mentioned. Instead, the term sex is used. Yet we are led to believe that this amendment is for women. Dear sweet women, please realize this amendment is not about you. Instead of being treated equally to men, you would be treated identically to men, and I really hope you're listening. The ERA promotes an equality of sameness, which erases the differences between men and women. Now let's stop and think about that for a minute. If the law no longer allows public colleges, businesses, places of employment to differentiate between male and female, here's what you can expect. Need to take a shower after a workout at the gym? Don't expect to clean up in a safe, protected environment because now it's illegal. If you're already concerned about sending your teenage daughter away to college, now imagine that she's sharing a bedroom with another teenage boy, because the law would no longer allow the college to differentiate between men and women. Why? Because it's now illegal. Women of domestic violence and abuse will be the real casualties of this amendment. Already fearing for their lives, they will now have an additional fear of not being able to safely use a protected women's-only dressing room or bathroom. Why will there be no safe spaces for women and young girls? Because it would be illegal. Women's scholarships, women's colleges, women's sports, women's locker rooms, and bathrooms will all be a tradition of the past, exposing women to increased incidences of rape and sexual violence. I'm proud to be a woman, and I appreciate the differences between men and women. And while I desire equal respect, that respect does not come through identical treatment in the passage of a well-intended yet misguided ERA. It's no wonder that some of the states who passed the ERA have now rescinded it. What at first glance looks like equality for women turns out to be the big bad wolf dressed up in grandma's nightgown. Women, are you going to fall for this? Are you going to be deceived into believing this failed amendment from the late 70s is still relevant or even helpful for women today? The truth is that women have already come a long way, and without the ERA, just look at the number of women in the General Assembly today as compared to 40 years ago in 1979. When our first female state senator, Eva Mae Scott, who used to hold my seat that I'm in now, was first elected to the Virginia General Assembly representing Amelia and surrounding counties. I'd also like to note that I'm the second female state senator serving Chesterfield, Colonial Heights, and Amelia, and Senator Scott and I did that all without the help of the ERA. Women are now attorneys, doctors, business owners, astronauts, Secretary of State, and senators. We can be anything we want to be and more. In fact, one of the leaders of the ERA movement, who I have so much respect for and I've really enjoyed spending time talking with her, is Eileen Davis. And just this November had her daughter, Abigail Spanberger, win the 7th congressional seat for Congress. Case in point. Abigail did not need the ERA. Currently, women can voluntarily apply and attend institutions like VMI, West Point, or the Naval Academy. Women are capable of facing combat, but the question remains this: should all women be held to this level of physical and mental training? Under the ERA, women would be automatically drafted into the armed services. Women can flourish in the military and have always held vital roles in rank. But mandating all women to be drafted changes everything. The truth is that women have come a long way over the past 40 years. We already have protections in our Virginia Constitution. The Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the Equal Pay for Equal Work Law, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, and the list goes on. Passing the ERA would actually take women back 40 years, eliminating thousands of federal, state, and local protections for women regarding marriage, divorce, family property law, adoptions, abortions, schools, and sports, ultimately transferring power and authority from the people to the federal government. Virginia is being asked to make history by becoming the 38th and the final state to ratify the ERA. But as Amy McNerney from Prince William County so appropriately said at the recent press conference, the ERA is DOA and has been since 1982. On October the 4th, 1982, in a Supreme Court case, National Organization of Women versus Idaho, the case was dismissed as moot, stating the amendment, meaning the ERA, has failed of adoption no matter what the resolution of the legal issues presented here, because the ERA had not received the required number of ratifications. Some say this is just a failed amendment and passage would do no harm. Regardless, the fine print of this amendment does not protect women. The very fact that it doesn't specifically mention women in the actual article itself describing our so-called protection. However, I wanted to listen to the women of my district. So instead, I've drafted Senate Joint Resolution 275 to affirm women, reaffirming equal protection under the law to show your support for women and how far we've come over the past 40 years. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator from Northern Fairfax, Senator Howe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking briefly to the Equal Rights Amendment.
Thank you, Senator. You have the floor.
This is a momentous day for the Senate of Virginia. It looks like, and I'm certainly hopeful, we're going to pass out of this body the Equal Rights Amendment. This isn't the first time we've done it, but what makes it so significant is there are so many people trying to get it approved that I think we have a chance in the House. But I'm speaking now for the Senate. I remember way back into the 70s when I first started pushing for the Equal Rights Amendment. I wasn't here. I was a young mother. And I was very interested in seeing how women could indeed have equal rights in the workplace. But in the 70s, we got all sorts of objections to the Equal Rights Amendment, and I frankly thought they were silly. The first one was, well, if you have the Equal Rights Amendment, women will be subject to the draft and they'll go into the military. Well, since then, we don't have the draft, and yes, women are in the military and doing very well. And then we heard this silly stuff about bathrooms. Now, come on. We have all over the place unisex bathrooms already. We can handle this. We can make care of this. And then there were all these arguments that if we pass this, abortion would become legal. Abortion is legal. It is guaranteed in the Constitution. So those arguments are already irrelevant. The abortion has been called by the Supreme Court established law. It's decided. But there is one thing that hasn't changed since the 70s, and it's barely gotten better. Women only make 80% now of what men make for the same work. This is wrong, and this needs to be corrected, and I am convinced that the ERA will help us get equal pay for equal work. Additionally, we now know that 80% of the people of Virginia want this to pass. That's pretty rare that we have anything that 80% wants us to do, and this is it. So I want to thank everybody who has been working so hard on this. For me, this is a very happy day, and I'm hopeful it will be followed by many more happy days on the ERA. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the senator. I'm going to call on our next speaker, but I also wanted to just very briefly thank our members in the gallery for your respectful consideration of the debate. It's very much appreciated, so thank you all so much. Call the senator from Hampton, Senator Locke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking in favor of the
Thank the senator. You have the floor.
Mr. President, in 1776, Abigail Adams lamented to her husband the lack of inclusion of women in the debates taken forward on the revolution. And she basically said to John Adams, and she asked him to remember the ladies, or women would foment a rebellion. Well, we've been fomenting rebellions ever since, certainly since the 20th century on behalf of the Equal Rights Amendment. So why an amendment? The senior senator from Richmond has already addressed some of the aspects of this. In 1863, Abraham Lincoln penned the Emancipation Proclamation, but it really didn't free slaves. It's the 13th Amendment that did that. It took an amendment, not the Emancipation Proclamation. In 1857, the Dred Scott decision said that people like me weren't citizens of the United States of America. It took an amendment to make me a citizen of this country. The 14th Amendment did that. It took amendments to give me voting rights in this country. It took the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the 24th Amendment to eliminate the poll tax in this country, and the 26th Amendment, which so happened to have been passed the year that I turned 18, so that I could register to vote in this country. Although individuals continue to put obstacles in the way, we still are able to vote because of amendments to the Constitution of the United States of America, a very sacred document in this country that it takes difficulty to amend. And it was deliberately done that way. The late, great Congresswoman from Texas, Barbara Jordan, once said, and I'm quoting her, "I've felt somehow for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton left me out of the Constitution by mistake. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decisions, I have finally been included in We the People." Mr. President, it is time to include women in this country in We the People. Thank you.
Thank the senator. Senator from Arlington, Senator Favola.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in favor of the resolution.
Thank you, Senator. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Following in the footsteps of the previous two speakers, I do want to note that Chief Justice Rehnquist actually testified in favor of the ERA to the House Judiciary Committee. And he noted, quote, "The desirability of obtaining a declaration of policy in the Constitution is there. The protection of women's equality should not be relegated to the changing politics of the legislative branch." So if we all agree, as Thomas Jefferson once wrote, that all men were created equal, if we believe that through our history and interpretations and over time that word of men should include women, now is the time to do it. The conversations we've been hearing about how women will not be treated well and when it comes to dormitory life or bathrooms, et cetera, The ERA is not going to override other amendments in our Constitution. There will still be the amendment to privacy. The courts will still be interpreting the law based on our culture and attitudes. This is not going to bring us into a spiral downhill fall. This is going to elevate us. This is going to put in our Constitution a valued statement. It's going to put in our Constitution the context with which our judicial system can interpret the law, can interpret cases when it comes before them. They will now have something that says men and women will be treated equally. Although I believe it says shall not be denied or abridged because of sex. I think it's time. Do not be fearful. This is a moment where we can rise above it all. This is a moment where Virginia can make history. I do hope today we can vote for this ERA resolution, and I respectfully ask my colleagues to support the resolution. Thank you.
Thank the senator. The junior senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to speak in favor of the resolution.
Senator, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today, I don't know if you noticed, I'm wearing a pen. It's a jail cell door. It represents the door to the cell that Alice Paul was in after being arrested for protesting at the White House for women's suffrage. And in that jail cell, she was force-fed when she engaged with her colleagues in a hunger strike. But she kept on fighting. She fought for the 19th Amendment and won, and then turned her attention to the Equal Rights Amendment and wrote the original version. Virginia is proud of our history. And this year, as we celebrate the 400th anniversary of the longest continuous representative democracy in the Western Hemisphere, the arrival of the first recorded Africans to our shores, the arrival of the first recruited English women to Jamestown. That was the birth of our nation. And the basic tenets of our democracy were penned by a Virginian, Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. He didn't mean me. He did not mean me. Because I'm of African descent and because I'm a woman. But my ancestors fought, marched, filed lawsuits, died to give me the right to vote and stand here today as a member of this body. Now, some of the arguments that have been used to keep my ancestors out, we've heard alluded to today. And the parade of horribles that we've heard is not going to happen because the Equal Rights Amendment puts us on a level playing field. Litigation under the 14th Amendment made clear that if you have a compelling state interest and you have a measure that is narrowly tailored to meet that interest, you can distinguish between people of different races, national origins, and religions. Women have had to use a different set of rules, an intermediate standard. And it is a lot harder to prove discrimination on the basis of sex, whether you're a man or a woman, than it is to prove discrimination on the basis of race, national origin, or religion. And yes, this amendment is for men and women. Make no mistake about it, because no one should be discriminated against on the basis of sex alone. And I will say there are some women who are strong enough to do whatever is demanded of them in the military. They're doing it. And there's a member of the Jennifer Caucus on the other side who went through VMI. I'd be proud to be in a trench with her anywhere, fighting to protect this country, knowing she has my back, and I know she could do it. Mr. President, we had a bus tour, and I had the pleasure of seeing someone I hadn't seen in a very long time when we were at Virginia State University. He was my Sunday school teacher at a small church that my dad pastored, Martin Harris. He's 101 years old. And he got up late one night and he said, I was 6 years old when the ERA passed. I don't understand what's taking so long. It's time. It's time. Sarah Moore Grimke once said, I ask no favors for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they will take their feet off our necks. What the Equal Rights Amendment does is it will say that the full weight of our government will not be used to discriminate on the basis of sex. It is time. It is well past time. And wouldn't it be poetic justice if Virginia, that so many times has been on the wrong side of history, so many times, as the capital of the Confederacy, as the birthplace in one of the largest slave markets in the country, as the leader of massive resistance, late to ratify the 14th Amendment, late to ratify the 19th Amendment. Wouldn't it be poetic justice if this year, as we celebrate the 400th anniversary of women, Africans, coming to Virginia and the first representative democracy in the Western Hemisphere, we should be the 38th state to ratify the ERA and finally bring truth to the promise that we are all created equal. And that's why I ask you to vote in favor of the resolution. Thank you.
I thank the senator, the senior senator from Fairfax County, Senator Saslaw.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator. You have the floor.
You know, I was tempted to say, I told them back in 1788 to include women in the Constitution, but, you know, after 240 years, it's time to write that into the Constitution. And as far as the fact that it doesn't say, it doesn't define sex, I would say to the senator from Chesapeake, it didn't define it in the 19th Amendment. There hasn't been any problems with that. In the 13th Amendment, when they were, I think it was race, color, creed, national origin, they didn't define that. Everybody knew what it meant, and there were no problems. And to those who think that this is going to turn the military upside down, let me just back up a little. I remember hearing the same. I was only 8 years old, but I remember hearing the same arguments when Harry Truman, President Truman, integrated the military. Okay, how this was going to be disruptive. Things would never be the same. Well, guess what? African Americans, darn good fighters. They're Medal of Honor winners in Korea, in Vietnam, distinguished themselves just fabulously. There wasn't any of the problems that were predicted. And as for the argument about the churches, the U.S. Supreme Court and the courts have always honored those traditions that are within the church themselves. Okay? That's not going to change by this amendment. And with respect to the military, they're not going to have to take more women if simply because of the 28th, if we add this 28th Amendment. Having the right stuff has been the sole determinant as to whether you can qualify as a U.S. Army Ranger or as a Navy SEAL. I think to date, one woman, there may be two now, have gone through the U.S. Army Ranger training. Guess what? They disqualify men if they don't have the right physical stuff. That's not going to change. Either you have that upper body strength or you don't. And to sit there and say that somehow or other they're going to have to overlook all of this is, as I said before, is sheer nonsense. After 240 years, it is time to put women into the Constitution in this country. They shouldn't have to go, hat in hand to all the courts all over the country on these discrimination cases. It ought to be, as I said, written into that document. And that's going to happen if we pass it here and down the hall. So I would hope that we would, start the history-making process by voting for the Equal Rights Amendment. Women have come a long way in our society, but 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lawsuit in court. I think it was Walmart, had 40 regional general managers around the globe, only 3 were women. And guess what? They didn't earn what the male general managers earned. That's correct. I think it finally was settled out of court. But that shouldn't happen. And, people who are making these decisions ought to be conscious of this. I don't think it's too much to ask. They ought to be conscious of this. So I would hope we do what I believe is the right thing. I know that it's controversial within a lot, but I've heard all these arguments before dealing with various civil rights issues, and none of it's ever come to pass. So it's time we do the right thing here today and pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard on Senate Joint Resolution 284? Seeing none, the question is, shall Senate Joint Resolution 284 be agreed to? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. Senate Joint Resolution 284 is agreed to.
We have 8.
Seeing at least 8 hands, we'll take a recorded vote. All those in favor of agreeing to Senate Joint Resolution 284 will record their vote aye. Those opposed, no. Are the senators ready to vote? Have all the senators voted? Do any senators desire to change their vote? Clerk will close the roll.
Ayes 26, nays 14.
Ayes 26, noes 14. Senate Joint Resolution 284 is agreed to.
Regular calendar, Senate Joint Resolution on second reading, Senate Joint Resolution 250, proposing an amendment to Section 1 of Article 5 of the Constitution of Virginia relating to executive power and the governor's term of office. Reported from the Committee on Privileges and Elections.
Senator from Alexandria, Senator Eben.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move the resolution be engrossed and advanced to its third reading.
Thank the Senator. The question is, shall Senate Joint Resolution 250 be engrossed and advanced to its third reading? All in favor of the motion will say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Senate Joint Resolution 250 is engrossed and advanced to its third reading. Senator from James City County, Senator Norman.
Mr. President, inquiry the clerk, does that complete today's calendar?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. For what purpose does the senator from Franklin, Senator Stanley, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for the purposes of an announcement.
The senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, you may have received earlier in the day an invitation from the New College Institute, where I serve as the chairman of the board of directors, for tonight. We're having a reception, and you all came down to Sam Miller's last year, and we had a wonderful time, and I'd invite you again. We've got a lot of important things going on in Martinsville and Henry County and Franklin County and Danville with regard to education and workforce, and New College is leading the way. So I know last year I said I'd buy you a beer. That was fake news. But this year I'll buy you a beer, and you can celebrate your win with us, or you can lament what happened. But we're all going to get together and have a great time together. So, and for a good institute that you all have supported in Virginia that promotes higher education to those at or below the poverty level and in economic distressed areas. So please come out to Sam Miller's tonight. It starts at 6. It's from 6 to 8. And this time I really will buy you a beer. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from Spotsylvania, Senator Reeves, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. Rise for a quick announcement.
Thank the senator. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tomorrow morning, the Military and Veterans Caucus will meet normal watering hole on the 5th floor to discuss the bill matrix for those bills that affect our National Guard, active duty troops, and our veterans. So we welcome you to that. Also, if the body will take note, January 31st, I know, Mr. President, you got that on your calendar already, is where we host our annual event to recognize our 33 military installation commanders that come in and all of our active duty and veterans over at the War Memorial. And we'd love to have you do that as well. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senator from James City County, Senator Normant, rise?
For purposes of a reminder, sir.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I would remind those members that received a verbal invitation to meet very briefly immediately upon adjournment will so do.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the junior senator from Richmond City, Senator McClellan, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for a point of personal privilege and a motion.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. 90 years ago today, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in Atlanta, Georgia. And last year, we commemorated the 50th anniversary of his death from an assassin's bullet. The Virginia Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Commission, of which I am proud to chair, has spent the last year focusing on Dr. King's life and legacy here in Virginia and his vision of a beloved community. As described by the King Center in Atlanta, in the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. In the beloved community, international disputes will be resolved by peaceful conflict resolution and reconciliation of adversaries instead of military power. Love and trust will triumph over fear and hatred. Peace and justice will prevail over war and military conflict. Dr. King spent a significant amount of time in Virginia protesting the closing of public schools, encouraging African American voter participation, and guiding civil rights demonstrations, and preaching his message of love and nonviolence. Between 1953 and 1967, he visited 13 localities in Virginia. A multi-city tour of Virginia was planned for March 1968, but he decided to go to Memphis to support the sanitation workers instead. Over the past year, the Commission has held a series of beloved community conversations where we visited 11 of the communities Dr. King visited. We'll finish the other 2 this year. During these visits, we asked each community, where are we today, 50 years later, in achieving Dr. King's vision of a beloved community? And where do we go from here? I wanted to share with you some of the responses we got with community members, educators, historians, legislators, religious and community leaders, students, and civil rights leaders who knew and worked with Dr. King and gave their accounts of his time here in Virginia. The conclusion, we aren't there yet. Those who spoke expressed dissatisfaction, uncertainty, and fear in the current political and cultural climate. Many felt a sense of having lost touch with our history and having lost cohesiveness in our communities. Many expressed feelings of helplessness against the ingrained systems that perpetuate racial and economic division. Many felt social media has driven a wedge between themselves and others. Many feared that any progress that we have made is being slowly eroded, and more dramatically in the past few years. But no community was without hope, nor did any fail to acknowledge the changes that we've seen in Virginia in the 50 years since Dr. King's death. When Dr. King led a rally here at the state capitol to call on Governor Allman to reopen Prince Edward County schools in 1960, there was not a single African-American member in the legislature. When he visited Farmville in 1962, Prince Edward County schools were still closed and will remain so for another 2 years. When he visited Danville in 1963, it was in the wake of police violence against African-American protesters on what became known as Bloody Monday. But in our conversations, students recognized that public education in Virginia is falling short to teach them their history of their own communities. And they called on adults to educate and guide them, but also to listen and learn from them. Religious leaders noted where the church was working to improve the community and where it could assume a more active role. Some acknowledged the success of programming to regularly bring together black and white communities led by the churches. And our citizens renewed their commitments to vote, hold their leaders accountable, and for some, take on leadership roles of their own. Historians urge that we remember Dr. King not as the uncontroversial figure we have made him to be, but as someone who was deeply unpopular at the time of his death, who upset the status quo and promised and created radical change. These community conversations have been recorded on our website, and I invite you to view them. In March of 1968, in the Washington Cathedral, Dr. King gave one of his final sermons entitled Remaining Awake Through a Revolution. It was a theme he previewed in his last visit to Virginia in Petersburg in 1967. He recalled the story of Rip Van Winkle, who we've all read, who slept for 20 years. What you may not have picked up in the story, though, is when Rip Van Winkle walked up the mountain to go take his nap, there was a portrait outside a tavern of King George III. When he came down, there was a portrait of President George Washington. Rip Van Winkle slept through a revolution. And Dr. King pointed out that we were then, and I say we still are now, in the midst of a triple revolution. A technological revolution, a revolution in weaponry, and a human rights revolution. And he talked about the challenges that we face in the midst of that revolution. We are challenged to develop a world perspective because no individual or nation can live alone, and anyone who thinks we can is sleeping through a revolution. He pointed to the challenge of eradicating the last vestiges of racial injustice from our nation. And he pointed to the challenge to rid our nation and the world of poverty and war. These were the central tenets of the beloved community that he strove and fought for. The promised land that he spoke of the night before he died. He knew he wouldn't make it. He knew he wouldn't live to see it. But he had an abiding faith that we would get there. And so it is up to us, each of us, to ask ourselves as we reflect on his life and legacy today and on the holiday that bears his name, what are you going to do today and every day to lead us as a people, as a commonwealth, as a nation to achieve the beloved community? And so, Mr. President, I move that when the Senate adjourn today, that we do so in the honor and memory of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Thank the senator. For what purpose does the senior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator Wagner, rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise for an announcement.
Senator has the floor.
Yes, Mr. President, for those members of the Commerce and Labor Committee, we will meet tomorrow morning at 8:30 in Senate Room B. That's a half an hour before the Finance Committee for purposes of a judicial interview.
Thank the senator. Is there any other business to come before the Senate? Seeing none, the clerk will report any announcements on the desk.
Today, Tuesday, January 15th, the Committee on Privileges and Elections will meet 15 minutes after adjournment in Senate Room 3 in the Capitol. The Committee on Local Government will meet 1/2 hour after adjournment, Senate Room A, Pocahontas. The Finance Subcommittee on Education will meet at 3:30 p.m., Subcommittee Number 1 on the 5th floor, Pocahontas. Senators Norman, Newman, Howell, Saslaw, Hanger, Ruff, Donovan, and Stewart. The Education and Health Subcommittee on Health will meet at 4 p.m., Senate Committee Room Number 2 on the 5th floor of the Pocahontas Building. Senators Cosgrove, Black, Barker, Lewis, and Suderline. Tomorrow, Wednesday, January 16th, Commerce and Labor will meet at 8:30 a.m. in Senate Room A for the purposes of a judicial interview. Commerce and Labor tomorrow, 8:30 a.m., Senate Room A. The Finance Subcommittee on Public Safety will meet at 7:30 a.m., Senate Leadership Conference Room, 6th floor, Pocahontas. Senators McDougal, Howell, Norman, Lucas, Carrico, and Obenshain. The Women's Legislative Roundtable will meet at 8:30 a.m., Tidewater Room on the 4th floor of the SunTrust Center. The Committee on Finance will meet at 9 a.m. in Committee Room B in the Pocahontas Building. The Republican Caucus will meet at 11:30 a.m. Senate Room 2 in the Capitol. The Democratic Caucus will meet at 11:30 a.m. in Senate Room 1 in the Capitol.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Senator from Bedford, Senator Newman.
Mr. President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn until 12 noon tomorrow. And when we do so in memory and honor of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr.
Thank the senator. Question is, shall the Senate adjourn until 12 noon tomorrow, and that when we adjourn, we will do so in the memory and honor of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. All in favor of the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The Senate stands adjourned until 12 o'clock tomorrow.